can enter any property here. Not this word again.
Not mine, and never again.
She was already inside my living room when I stepped out of the hallway. Her clipboard sat crooked under one arm, her heels planted on my rug like she owned the place. "Routine inspection," she said, voice sharp as a lock snapping shut. Lydia Hale, the board chair of Cedar Ridge Estates, the self-appointed guardian of symmetry and silence. Every neighbor feared her, but no one had ever seen her this far past the threshold before. She didn't even glance at my wife's medical equipment by the window. "Your blinds violate community uniformity," she continued, tapping her pen against her clipboard like a judge with a gavel. I let the words hang, then said quietly, "You just committed trespass, ma'am." That stopped her pen mid-air. "Excuse me?" I took one step closer, calm and deliberate. "This isn't your jurisdiction, it's my home, and I'm the cop you just broke into." The silence that followed felt heavier than the badge at my waist. Her posture faltered for the first time. Not from fear, but disbelief. Ever watched authority lose its shield? Subscribe. The board chair's about to learn what real accountability feels like. She recovered fast. "Detective or not," she snapped, "these windows are still non-compliant. The HOA has authority to inspect any property deemed in violation." There it was, the clipboard queen's favorite line. I'd heard it whispered by neighbors like a curse. Most people folded under her tone. They didn't know she only sounded like authority. "Show me the warrant," I said evenly. Her jaw clenched. "You're obstructing board procedure." "No," I replied, eyes steady. "You're obstructing the law." She turned red, the enforcer in crimson cornered. For a second, she glanced toward the door like she could rewind this moment. I didn't move. The badge clipped to my belt gleamed under the porch light that bled through the blinds. That same light my wife turned on each night when I worked late. A signal that our home was still ours. People think cops stop feeling violated once they've seen everything. They're wrong. My home had always been the one place I could switch off the instincts. The place where Elena could heal without strangers watching. That's why the sight of her IV stand, the air monitor, the small oxygen tank beside the couch, and this woman's red heels sinking into our carpet felt like a crime scene. When I met Elena 5 years ago, I promised her that no one would ever make her feel unsafe again. That promise wasn't poetic. It was binding. "Mr. Mercer," the officer of rules hissed, "if you refuse compliance, fines will escalate daily." She didn't realize every word was being recorded on my body cam. An old habit. The irony of it nearly made me smile. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Keep talking." She blinked, caught, between pride and panic. "Are you threatening me?" "Just documenting procedure." For the first time, I saw it. The flicker of doubt. Not guilt, but recognition. Like she finally sensed she wasn't playing chess with a homeowner, but with law itself. I walked her to the door without touching her. "You'll receive a written statement," I said, tone firm but civil. "You've just entered a private residence without consent. That's not a rule infraction, that's a criminal entry." Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare?" I met her stare. "You're standing in my dare." The tyrant in heels hesitated at the threshold, the porch light spilling across her polished shoes. It was the same light she'd ordered my neighbor to dim 2 nights ago. She stepped back into the darkness, face stiff, mask cracking. She tried to salvage dignity. "You'll regret challenging this board." Maybe she believed it. Maybe she'd spent so long confusing fear with respect that she couldn't tell the difference. But as the door shut and the latch clicked home, I felt the weight of something else entirely. Elena's safety, my daughter's trust, and the quiet realization that Lydia Hale had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The kind of line that summons every ounce of training I'd ever sworn to use for good. By morning, word had spread like wildfire through Cedar Ridge. The board chair had been humiliated inside a homeowner's living room. That was the phrase neighbors whispered between hedges, careful not to be seen by her. Lydia Hale didn't lose gracefully. She struck first. Before sunrise, a violation notice appeared taped to my front door. "Obstruction of inspection," it read in bold letters, "a fine of $1,500." I stood there in my robe, coffee cooling in my hand, watching as the ink bled slightly in the dew. Elena was still asleep. She didn't need to see this, not today. I knew her pattern. Lydia, or as the locals had started calling her again, the clipboard queen. never attacked directly twice in a row. She preferred pressure over force, psychological warfare dressed as paperwork. By noon, 3 more letters followed. One cited visible medical equipment, another unapproved medical personnel entering the premises. The last one accused me of disturbing community harmony. Harmony, the word tasted like rust. It wasn't the fines that got to me, it was the invasion wrapped in bureaucracy. That was her art form. Later that day, while I was cleaning the porch, I saw her walking the street again, the enforcer in crimson, red blazer, sunglasses reflecting the neat rows of houses like mirrored trophies. She carried a folder this time, not a clipboard, a new weapon. When our eyes met, she smiled like we shared a secret. "Morning, detective," she said, the title bending under her tongue. "I trust you received our notices?" I didn't answer. Silence unnerves people like her. She thrived on reaction. Without it, her power had nowhere to go. Behind her, Officer Laura Chen trailed quietly. She wore her off-duty uniform, a community liaison badge glinting in the sun, but her shoulders were tense. Her eyes darted between us, uneasy. She wasn't used to watching a civilian stand his ground. The tyrant in heels adjusted her glasses. "I'm simply ensuring compliance, Mr. Mercer. You of all people should appreciate the importance of procedure." That word again. Procedure. I'd lived my career by it, but she weaponized it. "Procedure starts with consent," I replied evenly. She took a step closer, tone tightening. "I don't need your consent. I have community authority." I let her finish, then asked, "Did the county issue that authority? Or did you print it yourself?" Laura flinched, subtle, but I caught it. Lydia didn't. The officer of rules exhaled through her nose. "You think your badge gives you special protection?" "No," I said. "It gives me understanding of the difference between law and theater." For the first time, she hesitated. Her lips pressed thin, her jaw muscle twitching under the strain of composure. I saw her pride cracking, just enough for fear to start seeping through. She shifted the folder in her hand. "Expect further action, detective. You'll learn this community values obedience." Her heels clicked away down the street, a slow metronome of arrogance fading into the cul-de-sac curve. Laura lingered. Her posture said duty, but her eyes said doubt. She gave me a small nod, almost an apology, before following her superior. I watched them go, the heat from the pavement distorting their silhouettes. That's when I noticed something else. 3 security cameras on the neighboring fences, all newly installed, all pointing toward my property. The clipboard queen had found a new way in. I felt the weight of my badge again, not as power, but as responsibility. She wasn't just after me now, she was setting a precedent. If she could invade a cop's home and get away with it, what chance did anyone else here have? I turned toward the porch, the front light still shining in the daylight. My symbolic line, my reminder. Lydia Hale had drawn first blood in paperwork, but she'd just exposed her blind spot. She believed fear and law were the same thing. She was about to learn the difference. The next morning, I drove down to the Cedar Ridge HOA office, a tan stucco building that tried too hard to look like City Hall. Inside, the air was cold and staged, like a set built for authority. Certificates framed the walls, none of them official. Behind the counter sat Lydia Hale herself, dressed like she'd been waiting for me. The board chair looked up from her desk with a practiced smirk. "Detective Mercer, I was wondering when you'd come in to settle your account." I glanced around. No one else was in the lobby. Even the receptionist's chair was empty. This wasn't business, it was a performance. "Interesting," I said. "You send 4 citations in 24 hours and call it procedure, but when I show up, you suddenly have time to meet in person." Her smile didn't move. "I believe in handling serious matters face to face." "Breaking and entering is serious," I said quietly. Her hand froze over the keyboard for half a second. Then she leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "You're dramatizing a misunderstanding, detective. The HOA is empowered to conduct wellness checks when we have reason to believe residents are violating safety codes." "Funny," I said, "most wellness checks don't involve trespassing into a private home or ignoring medical notices." The enforcer in crimson tilted her head. "Perhaps if your blinds matched the community standard, we wouldn't have been so concerned about what you were hiding." There it was, the projection. Every tyrant needs a justification, and hers was always concern. At that moment, the door opened behind me. Officer Laura Chen stepped in, clipboard in hand, expression tight. She froze when she saw us facing off across the desk. Lydia's tone shifted instantly, like flipping a switch. "Ah, Officer Chen," she said sweetly. "Perfect timing. You can confirm that the board acted well within its rights during last week's inspection." Laura hesitated. Her gaze flicked to me, then back to Lydia. "Ma'am," she began carefully, "the board doesn't have legal authority to enter private property without consent or a court order." The clipboard queen's smile thinned. "We discussed this, officer. Your role here is advisory. The HOA isn't bound by county protocol." Laura's knuckles whitened around her clipboard. Her voice was soft, but it cracked slightly. "With respect, ma'am, that's not how the law works." The air went razor sharp. Lydia's composure slipped just enough to show the fracture. "Detective Mercer," she said, recovering, "perhaps you've misunderstood our volunteers' enthusiasm. Officer Chen isn't speaking in any official capacity." Laura swallowed hard. "Maybe not, but as an officer, I'm obligated to report any unlawful entry, regardless of uniform." The tyrant in heels stood up, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You will do no such thing," she hissed, her voice lowering into a tone that was meant to intimidate. I watched the exchange silently, noting every twitch in Laura's expression. Her eyes darted toward the badge on my belt again, then back to Lydia. Conflict was written across her face, a tug of war between protocol and fear. I decided to cut through it. "You're right, Lydia," I said evenly. "She won't need to report it. I already did." Her jaw tightened. "You filed a complaint?" "Complaint? No. Incident report." The officer of rules stepped closer to her desk, fury rising beneath her practiced calm. "You think hiding behind your badge will scare me?" "No," I said. "I think the law should scare you all on its own." Laura looked between us, visibly trembling now. Her loyalty had cracked, and Lydia knew it. The board chair forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "This community doesn't respond well to threats, detective. I'd suggest you remember who writes the citations here." I stepped toward the door, keeping my voice low. "And I'd suggest you remember who signs the warrants." When I left, Laura followed me out, stopping just before the door. "Detective," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You were right about her. She's pushing limits." "She already crossed them," I said. "You just have to decide when you'll stop following her across the line." Laura didn't answer, but her silence said everything. Inside, I heard the clipboard queen slam her folder shut. The game had changed, the witness was cracking, and the tyrant knew it. By the next week, the atmosphere in Cedar Ridge felt heavier, like the air itself had learned to whisper. People waved from a distance now, quick nods and polite avoidance. No one wanted to be seen talking to the man who'd stood up to the board chair. That was fine by me. Silence was its own kind of protection. But Lydia Hale wasn't silent. By Tuesday morning, she'd issued a new emergency compliance mandate for the entire community. On paper, it was about security concerns and home safety checks. In practice, it was permission for her enforcers to patrol streets, peek into windows, and note suspicious activity. The clipboard queen had turned paranoia into policy. I watched one of her volunteers, two men in bright orange vests, hover outside my fence, pretending to measure shrub height. Elena stood at the window, her oxygen tube curling down her neck, watching them like ghosts in daylight. I stepped outside before they could knock. "Looking for something?" One of them muttered. "Routine check, sir. Orders from the board." "Whose board?" I asked, voice low. "Because county law sure didn't sign off on this one." They left fast, but not before I noticed Lydia's black sedan idling at the corner. She was there, watching. The enforcer in crimson sat in her car with the engine running, sunglasses hiding everything but her satisfaction. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. Her message was clear. She'd found a new way to invade, without stepping foot inside. That night, I called Officer Chen. Her voice was strained, quiet. "Detective, you shouldn't contact me on this number." "Then tell me where," I said. Silence. Then, "She's tightening her grip. The other board members, half of them are scared. The rest are on her payroll." "Volunteers don't get paychecks," I said. "They do when her husband owns the maintenance contracts," she replied. That was it, the missing piece. Lydia wasn't just a tyrant in heels. She was protecting money. The HOA's inspection fees, landscaping funds, even late fines, all redirected to shell companies under her husband's name. I knew corruption when I saw it, but this time, it was hiding behind a neighborhood gate. "Laura," I said carefully, "you need to step away from this before it pulls you under." Her voice trembled. "She's already warned me once, said if I embarrassed the board again, I'd be done in this town." "You still wearing your badge?" "Yes." "Then she's not the law. You are." The line went quiet. I could almost hear her breathing. "Detective, if you're planning something, don't do it alone." I hung up, watching the porch light flicker. That light had become more than a habit. It was a promise, to Elena, to myself, that I'd keep our home safe. The next morning, my neighbor, Mrs. Carver, slipped an envelope into my mailbox. Inside were photos, grainy prints showing Lydia's husband shaking hands with a contractor at the HOA office, cash changing hands, and one shot of Lydia herself, signing something under the headline, "Maintenance Reallocation Form." The officer of rules had just handed me her biggest violation yet. I scanned the signature twice, memorizing every curl. I'd seen that same flourish on the notices she taped to my door. She'd buried her trail in official language, but I was about to dig it back up, inch by inch. That evening, I stood by the window as the sunset painted the cul-de-sac red. Lydia's car rolled by again. She didn't stop this time. Just a slow drive, a long glance, and a smirk that said she thought she still controlled the board, and the fear. But she didn't realize something had shifted. The community was watching, the cracks were showing, and I had just found my first piece of real evidence. The war had officially gone public. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the walls sounded like footsteps. Every headlight across the blinds felt like surveillance. Lydia Hale had crossed from nuisance to obsession, and now, so had I. By dawn, I was sitting at my desk, tracing the ink signature on that maintenance reallocation form again and again. The handwriting didn't just match the violation letters she'd left on my door. It matched the HOA's treasury approvals too. The board chair had been forging internal authorizations. The maintenance funds weren't just misused, they were rerouted straight into her husband's company. It wasn't about lawns and lights anymore, it was theft wrapped in HOA authority. Still, it wasn't enough. I needed proof that connected her voice to her signature. So I waited, watched her patterns, her morning walks, her meetings at the cul-de-sac. Every tyrant had a rhythm. I just had to find the beat. That afternoon, I parked near the HOA's community center, where she held her so-called safety oversight meetings. I'd rigged a small lapel, recorder to my phone, nothing invasive, just public audio. She'd never know she was recording her own confession. When Lydia arrived, dressed sharp as ever in that scarlet jacket, she moved like she owned the asphalt. The enforcer in crimson carried her clipboard like a scepter, flipping through papers as if counting trophies. Her voice carried through the open glass door. "We'll be reallocating remaining funds to Hale Property Management. Efficiency requires trusted hands." Someone in the room hesitated, a man's voice, timid, uncertain. "But that's your husband's firm, isn't it?" Lydia didn't even blink. "And your point?" The clipboard queen smiled then, the kind of smile that said she was untouchable. "If anyone here feels uneasy, I invite you to review our bylaws. I wrote them myself." And just like that, she admitted it, on tape. My pulse kicked. That was the break I needed. Not a basement discovery, not a dramatic file pull, just a professional observation, patient and methodical. When I stepped outside, the sun had turned brutal, bouncing off car hoods and windows like interrogation lights. Across the lot, I spotted Officer Chen standing near her cruiser, her posture rigid. She looked like she wanted to speak, but didn't know how. "Laura," I called. She turned, startled. "You shouldn't be here. She's watching everything now." "I'm counting on it." Her gaze softened, but her voice was firm. "You don't understand what she's capable of, Detective. People have lost their jobs over crossing her. The HOA's insured under her name." "Then that's where I'll hit her," I said. "Insurance means audits. Audits mean paper trails." Laura's face paled. "You're going after the records?" "I'm going after the truth." The tyrant in heels stepped out of the building just then, phone to her ear, her expression unreadable. She spotted us and slowed her stride. "Well," she said with mock cheer, "if it isn't our neighborhood's newest celebrity cop, should I expect a warrant next?" "Only if you keep talking," I replied. She chuckled, but there was tension beneath it. "Careful, Detective. Defiance doesn't look good in uniform." Neither does fraud, I said quietly. For a split second her eyes flickered, just enough to tell me she'd understood the word fraud. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice. You think your badge gives you immunity. It doesn't. Not here. She turned sharply, heels slicing against the concrete as she walked away. Laura exhaled shakily. She's panicking. Good, I said. Panic makes mistakes easier to catch. That night, I transferred the audio file to 3 encrypted drives, one for me, one for my attorney, one hidden in plain sight. I played it once more, the sound of her voice echoing through the room like a warning to herself. The HOA exists to maintain order, she'd said. But now, her own order. That was crumbling, recorded, time-stamped, and ready for exposure. The next phase wasn't about defense anymore. It was about taking back control, and Lydia Hale had just handed me the first nail for her own coffin. The following morning, the air in Cedar Ridge felt like it had been vacuum sealed. Still, tense, too quiet. That's how you know someone's spreading fear efficiently. Lydia Hale didn't just run her HOA like a business, she ran it like an occupation. By 9 a.m., 3 neighbors had already received new citations for security violations. One for a wind chime, another for unapproved garden stones. And me, I got a notice taped right to my windshield. Unauthorized surveillance equipment, immediate fine, $1,000. The officer of rules didn't waste time. She'd learned about my recording somehow. Either someone talked, or she'd been listening longer than I realized. When I peeled the paper off my truck, I noticed something new. Handwriting that wasn't hers. The ink was thicker, the slant awkward. Someone else had written it on her behalf. Lydia didn't delegate unless she was rattled. That meant the clipboard queen was slipping. If this moment gave you chills, hit like and stand with justice. I took a photo of the citation, time-stamped it, and sent it to my attorney. Chain of retaliation's getting longer, I texted. Good. Then, for the first time in weeks, I drove to the local precinct. Not as a detective, but as a homeowner. The shift in power felt strange. The badge on my belt wasn't authority here. It was evidence that she'd picked the wrong target. Officer Chen met me in the back lot. Her uniform looked the same, but her eyes told me she hadn't slept either. You can't file a formal complaint against her yet, she said quickly. Not without risking a counterclaim. She's claiming you've been intimidating the board. I smirked. By existing? By investigating. I leaned against my truck. Laura, I have her voice admitting fund reallocation. You heard it yourself. That's more than intimidation. It's fraud. She lowered her tone. Then you'd better move fast. She's calling an emergency board session tonight. No notice, no agenda, you're on it. Uninvited, I assume. Very, she said, half a breath of a laugh. But you'll go anyway. The board chair had always loved spectacle, and an emergency meeting in Cedar Ridge meant one thing: intimidation disguised as governance. By dusk, the HOA conference hall was already full, 30 residents sitting stiffly in folding chairs, whispering behind clipped smiles. Lydia Hale stood at the front, crimson jacket catching the fluorescent light, her posture immaculate. She looked like she was conducting an orchestra of compliance. Before we begin, the enforcer in crimson announced, I'd like to address a matter of community safety. Certain individuals have been engaging in unlawful recording and harassment of board members. Her eyes locked on me. Every head in the room turned. Such actions, she continued, constitute a violation of Section 14B of our bylaws. This board will not tolerate abuse, especially from those who should know better. I rose slowly. You're accusing me of harassment for recording a public meeting, Lydia. It's Mrs. Hale, detective, she corrected sharply. And yes, you've made our volunteers feel unsafe. The tyrant in heels spoke like she was giving a sermon, her tone dripping with moral superiority. I didn't take the bait. That's interesting, I said, because the county code I helped enforce for 10 years defines harassment a little differently. You want to talk about unsafe? How about breaking into a private residence under the guise of inspection? A ripple went through the crowd, soft gasps, uneasy whispers. Lydia's hand twitched just once. Then she smiled. You can spin your stories all you want, detective, but the HOA isn't under your jurisdiction. Maybe not, I said, pulling the small recorder from my pocket. But your voice is. The room went still. "You're bluffing," she said, though her confidence faltered. I pressed play. Her words filled the hall. "We'll be reallocating remaining funds to Hale Property Management. Efficiency requires trusted hands." For 3 seconds, no one breathed. Then Mrs. Carver, the quiet widow from down the lane, stood up. "You mean you've been paying yourself?" The board chair's mask cracked. "Sit down, Mabel." But it was too late. The silence had broken. I shut off the recorder and said calmly, "I'm sure the county auditor will enjoy that performance." Lydia didn't respond. Her jaw worked, her knuckles white against the podium. The queen had been cornered in her own castle. And though she didn't know it yet, tonight was only the first act of her fall. Rain hammered the windows through most of the night, but it wasn't the thunder keeping me awake. It was the silence between each rumble, the kind of silence that means someone's watching. By sunrise, I knew Lydia Hale was planning something. The clipboard queen never stayed quiet unless she was plotting her next strike. At 7:42 a.m., I got a knock on the door. It wasn't loud, 3 precise taps. I opened it to find Officer Laura Chen standing on my porch, raincoat dripping, eyes bloodshot. She looked like someone who'd spent the night fighting her conscience. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I can't watch this go any further." Her voice trembled as she stepped inside. The board chair had clearly gotten to her. "I'm supposed to file an internal report on you," Chen said. "She's claiming you're weaponizing your badge to intimidate the HOA. She's pulling in county contacts, people who owe her favors." "So she's escalating to politics now?" I muttered. "Figures." Laura hesitated, glancing at the folder in her hand. "There's more. The HOA's new security upgrade, the one she pushed through last quarter. It's not just cameras, it's audio-enabled. She's been monitoring residents illegally." My stomach turned. "You're sure?" Laura nodded. "I saw the contracts myself. The officer of rules signed off on third-party data collection without disclosure, and the vendors tied to her husband's firm." That was it, the missing link. The HOA wasn't just harassing people. Lydia was building a private surveillance network, all under the guise of neighborhood safety. I studied Laura's face. She was pale, conflicted, terrified, but she was still here. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I was in that room," she said softly. "The night she decided to break into your house." The words hit harder than I expected. Laura kept talking, her tone low, ashamed. "She said you were hiding evidence that could compromise the community." I tried to stop her, but she had the master key. She took 2 security volunteers and forced entry. "And you?" "I stood in the driveway," she said, listening. She looked away, guilt spreading across her face. That's when I realized what kind of person she really is. I can't serve 2 masters anymore. The enforcer in crimson had finally pushed her too far. I poured Laura a cup of coffee, though her hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. "You've done the right thing," I said quietly. "But from this point on, you're not just a witness. You're part of this fight." She nodded, eyes brimming with fear and determination. "I'll testify. I'll bring the documents, but you'll need protection." She's got people inside the precinct. "I've got friends too," I said, "ones who still believe in the badge." Outside, a silver sedan slowed near my driveway, engine idling. The tyrant in heels was early. Through the windshield, I caught the faint outline of her crimson blazer and that ever-present clipboard resting on her lap. "She's here," I whispered. Laura moved toward the window. "She's checking who's with you." I smiled grimly. "Then let her see. Maybe she'll realize she just lost her inside line." The car lingered for a moment longer, then pulled away. Fast, too fast for calm. When I turned back to Laura, she was already pulling files from her bag. "These are copies of the HOA's vendor contracts. You'll want the last 2 pages. There's an unlisted clause that authorizes private data transfers." She signed it herself. I took the folder carefully, feeling the weight of it. Proof, finally, clean, legal, irrefutable. The board chair's empire had been built on secrecy, and now one of her own had just cracked it open from the inside. "Laura," I said quietly, "this is the beginning of the end for her." She met my gaze. "Then make it count." I closed the folder and stared out into the rain, where the last ripples of her tires were fading into the distance. Lydia Hale had started this war in my living room, but now it was going to end in hers. By the time the rain stopped, the ground around Cedar Ridge looked freshly washed, clean, but not pure. It was the calm that comes before people start breaking, and Lydia Hale was about to break. I spent the next morning in my office, blinds half drawn, combing through the contracts Officer Chen had risked everything to hand me. Each clause read like a confession, hidden payments, blind authorizations, and those subtle phrases she loved: discretionary oversight, streamlined authority, board-approved security. It wasn't just corruption, it was a web of plausible deniability. The officer of rules had engineered an entire shadow system, one that let her record neighbors, flag behavioral concerns, and profit from it. Halfway through the files, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Detective Pierce," I answered. A voice I didn't recognize whispered, "She knows Laura talked." The line went dead. That's when I knew things were accelerating. Lydia wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was going on offense. I forwarded the vendor contracts to my legal contact at the county attorney's office and encrypted the originals. Then I texted Laura, "Get somewhere safe. Don't go home." Her reply came fast, "Already ahead of you." Outside, the neighborhood was unnervingly still. Lawns trimmed, mailboxes polished, cars motionless. The illusion of peace that the clipboard queen had built for years was cracking, and everyone could feel it. You could see it in how blinds shifted when I walked past, how people lingered on porches but pretended to check their phones. Fear was contagious here. By late afternoon, I was parked near the HOA office, an old converted model home with tinted windows and a flagpole that never flew anything but their emblem. From the outside, it looked sterile. From the inside, it was where control lived and breathed. Through the front glass, I saw the board chair pacing, phone clutched to her ear. Even from across the street, I could read her body language. Short movements, rigid shoulders, the kind that come from panic disguised as posture. I waited until she left, heels clicking like gunfire across the pavement. Then I went in. The place smelled of disinfectant and printer toner. On the main desk sat a red folder marked Incident Reports, Priority. Inside were complaints, real ones, filed by residents she'd ignored, covered, or rewritten. One name appeared over and over: Langston, D., the retired postal worker who'd vanished from meetings 2 months back. He'd accused Lydia of spying through HOA-installed cameras before suddenly selling his house. But here was his original letter, time-stamped, never. Filed. I photographed every page. When I stepped outside again, the sun was dipping low. That's when I saw her waiting beside my truck. Lydia Hale herself, immaculate as ever, hair sharp as glass. "Breaking and entering, detective?" she asked coolly. "Public building," I said. "Tax-funded, technically." Her smirk didn't reach her eyes. "You're trespassing in spirit, if not in law. And you've been trespassing in homes, if not in daylight." For a heartbeat, we just stared. The enforcer in crimson was trying to read my angle, but the problem with control freaks is that they can't imagine being outplayed. "You've made this personal," she said finally. "That's your mistake." "No," I replied, stepping closer. "You did that the second you called yourself the law." She held her ground, chin lifting. "You're bluffing. You have nothing that sticks." I let the silence stretch, then showed her my phone screen. One photo, her signature beside a vendor payout. Funny, that's not what the county auditor said. The tyrant in heels froze. For once, no retort, no smirk. Just calculation flickering in her gaze, searching for the next manipulation that wouldn't come. I lowered my voice. "You think you run this neighborhood, Lydia, but the truth is, you've been under investigation since the day you stepped into my house." Her breath hitched, barely audible. "You can't prove intent." "Don't need to," I said. "Pattern's enough." She turned sharply, heels striking asphalt like punctuation marks. When she drove off, I watched her taillights vanish down the slope towards Cedar Lane. She was unraveling, and I knew what came next. When people like her lose control, they stop playing defense. I opened my glove box and checked my recorder's red light, still blinking, still alive. The game wasn't over. It was entering the phase I'd been waiting for. And this time, Lydia Hale wouldn't see the trap until it snapped shut. The next 48 hours felt like holding my breath underwater. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew something was coming. They just didn't know whose side to stand on. By sunrise, Lydia Hale had gone silent online. The clipboard queen who used to post daily HOA bulletins about lawn colors and garbage schedules hadn't said a word. That silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. She was circling her wagons. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, notes sprawled across a dozen sticky pads. Each detail, each timestamp, was a step in her unraveling. Every lie she told had a signature, and I'd finally mapped the pattern. When my doorbell rang, I didn't even flinch. It was Officer Laura Chen, trench coat damp from the morning drizzle. Her face told me she hadn't slept. "She's meeting someone today," Laura said quietly. "Down at the Ridgeview Cafe, a lawyer from Carter and Branson, the firm that handles most HOA disputes in the county." "Her husband's old firm," I said. "Of course," Laura nodded. "I heard her on the radio call. She's trying to file a restraining order against you before you file criminal charges. Typical officer of rules move. Build a wall of paperwork before the truth can break through it." "Let her," I said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "What she doesn't know is that I already sent everything to the state attorney. That's a copy for you. Keep it safe." Laura hesitated before taking it. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sam." "No," I said, standing. "I'm finishing one she started." At 10:17 a.m., I parked across from Ridgeview Cafe. The sun was bright but cold, too clean for the kind of talk happening inside. Through the glass, I saw the enforcer in crimson, sitting across from a tall man in a charcoal suit. Her posture was rigid, her smile brittle. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Her hands told the story, gestures sharp, defensive. She was losing ground. The man stood abruptly, shook his head, and walked out. She followed him to the door, voice raised. For a flicker of a second, her mask slipped, eyes wild, lips trembling. The tyrant in heels wasn't untouchable anymore. When she spotted me across the street, her expression twisted into something between fury and fear. She mouthed 2 words. "You're done." I smiled. "Not yet," I murmured. Back home, I opened the security logs from the HOA servers. The login patterns Laura had shown me matched Lydia's credentials, but there was something new. Last night, an attempt to access my home camera feed had been traced to an IP registered to the HOA office. I cross-checked it with the timestamp of her meeting. She'd been spying even as she tried to cover her tracks. I exported the data, attached it to my ongoing report, and sent it to the cybersecurity liaison at the department. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a single text. "Confirmed. Digital intrusion under her credentials. She's cornered." The satisfaction was brief because cornered people fight back. That evening, I drove through the neighborhood, noting the closed curtains, the empty sidewalks. It was eerie, like the whole place was holding its breath. Near the HOA clubhouse, I saw her car again, parked crooked. Lydia stood outside, phone pressed to her ear, her voice echoing faintly through the still air. I caught pieces of it. "Can't lose control. They'll vote me out. No, I don't care what it costs." She turned suddenly, noticing me. "Eavesdropping now, detective? Just making sure you're not breaking into anyone else's home," I said. Her laugh was hollow. "You think you're the hero here, don't you? These people need order. Without me, this place falls apart." "Maybe it needs to," I said evenly. For a moment, neither of us moved, just the soft rustle of wind through the oaks. Then she leaned in slightly, her voice like glass, scraping metal. "You can't arrest structure, Samuel. You can't handcuff order." I met her gaze. "But I can arrest the person hiding behind it." She froze, realizing the inevitability she'd been avoiding was now written all over my face. The board chair stepped back, her confidence slipping like a mask in the rain. "You don't have the power." "I don't need it," I interrupted. "The state does." Her phone buzzed then. I saw her glance at the screen, and whatever she read drained the color from her face. That was the moment she finally understood. The board wasn't hers anymore. Lydia Hale's empire had just turned against her. And I wasn't done yet. The meeting fractured long before it ended. Half the room left in stunned silence. The other half whispered like witnesses to a crime they couldn't unsee. And in a way, they were. Lydia Hale had lost her mask that day, but masks don't shatter quietly. They cut everything around them when they fall. I spent that night on the porch, rain tapping the railing like a metronome counting down. Laura had been right to call in the county investigator, But Lydia wasn't going to wait to be cornered. People like her don't surrender. They strike before the law catches up. At 9:42 p.m., my phone buzzed again. An unknown number, static. Then a whisper. "She's at your house." I was already moving before the words fully registered. My truck's headlights sliced through the fog as I turned onto Oak Bend Drive. And there she was, standing on my lawn, the clipboard queen drenched from the rain, a flashlight trembling in her hand. Her crimson jacket was soaked dark, her posture off balance, but her eyes, those eyes still burned with control. "What are you doing here, Lydia?" I called out, stepping from the truck. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone I built. You turned my board against me." "This isn't about humiliation," I said carefully. "It's about accountability." She took a shaky step forward. "Accountability?" Her voice cracked. "I gave this neighborhood order, discipline. Without me, this place will rot." I kept my tone calm, but my hand hovered near my badge out of instinct. "You entered my house once without consent. Do not take another step, Lydia." The tyrant in heels froze, rain streaking down her face like tears she refused to show. "You don't scare me, detective. I've dealt with men who thought rules didn't apply to them." "Then you should recognize what happens when they finally do." For a long, electric moment, the storm swallowed our words. Thunder rolled across the ridge, low and steady. She laughed, a brittle, disbelieving sound. "Do you really think a few papers and recordings will erase what I've done here? They need me." "No, Lydia," I said quietly. "They feared you. That's not the same thing." Her jaw clenched. "Fear keeps people obedient. Fear breeds rebellion." She raised the flashlight like a weapon. "You don't belong here, Pierce. This neighborhood was never meant for people like you." That one stung more than it should have. People like me? Ones who question the order. She stepped closer, voice trembling but vicious. Ones who don't understand how fragile peace really is. "You mean peace built on silence?" I shot back. By the time the storm cleared, Cedar Ridge was buzzing with a single rumor. An emergency HOA board hearing had been called. Lydia Hale was making her last stand. Laura texted me at 7:02 a.m. She's calling it a community restoration meeting. Looks more like damage control. I knew better. This wasn't about restoration. It was about survival. When I arrived at the clubhouse, cars were already spilling out into the street. Neighbors huddled under umbrellas, whispering like they were about to watch a public execution. And, in a way, they were. Inside, the clipboard queen stood beneath the spotlight, the American flag draped behind her like an unearned halo. Her crimson blazer was perfectly pressed again, her hair immaculate. You wouldn't know she'd been standing in the rain threatening me just 12 hours earlier. Lydia Hale had rebuilt her armor overnight. "Good morning," she began, voice cool and commanding. "It's come to my attention that false information has been circulating about this board's actions. I intend to set the record straight." She scanned the room, eyes sharp, smile plastic. "Detective Pierce has been spreading lies about me, my integrity, and this community's leadership. Tonight, we reclaim our dignity." Her followers clapped weakly, but most of the crowd stayed still. They were waiting for me. I stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Dignity isn't what you reclaim, Lydia. It's what you lose when you think power equals permission." She tilted her head slightly. "Still playing the martyr, are we? You broke confidentiality. You stole internal HOA data." I held up a folder. "You mean the same data that shows you used HOA funds to spy on private residents?" Gasps rippled through the room. The board chair tried to cut me off. "That's an outrageous—" "Outrageous," I interrupted, "is entering someone's home with a master key and calling it a routine inspection. Outrageous is wiring security cameras to residents' living rooms. Outrageous is using your position to intimidate the very people you swore to protect." The tension thickened until even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder. Lydia tried to laugh, but her voice trembled. "You have no proof that any of that—" I pressed a button on my phone, and the projector flickered to life. The screen filled with grainy night vision footage, Lydia's figure crossing a porch, her key glinting as she unlocked a door. My door. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Someone whispered, "That's her!" Her confidence cracked. "That footage is manipulated." Laura stood from the back, stepping into the light. No, it's authenticated. I verified the metadata myself. The enforcer in crimson turned on her like a wounded predator. You betrayed your oath, Officer Chen. No, Laura said firmly. You betrayed the law. The room erupted, neighbors whispering, some shouting. Lydia slammed her clipboard on the podium, her voice slicing through the noise. Enough! You people think you understand how communities stay safe? Without order, you'll descend into chaos. I made this neighborhood. You controlled it, I said quietly, but you never cared for it. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for allies. None met her gaze. Even her loyalists had gone silent. I stepped closer. You were right about one thing, Lydia. Order matters. That's why we called the state attorney. Her face went still. You... What? The side doors opened. 2 plainclothes investigators entered, badges visible. The crowd parted as they approached the podium. Lydia Hale, one said calmly. You're under investigation for unauthorized entry, misuse of HOA funds, and obstruction of justice. The tyrant in heels didn't move. She just stood there, clipboard clutched in both hands like a shield made of paper. This is absurd, she whispered. They need me. Laura stepped beside me, voice soft but firm. No, Lydia. They needed you to stop. The officers guided her toward the exit. The air in the room shifted, heavier at first, then lighter, like the neighborhood itself had exhaled. She paused at the doorway, turning back once. Her voice cracked with a mix of rage and disbelief. You'll regret this, Pierce. You'll see what happens when order collapses. I didn't answer. I just watched as the officer of rules, the woman who once ruled with fear, was led out through her own front gate. For the first time, Cedar Ridge was quiet, not controlled, just quiet. And that silence was worth every fight. The officer of rules shook her head, drenched hair plastered to her face. You'll regret this crusade. When they come for you, when your own badge turns on you, you'll remember tonight. Lightning split the sky above us, painting her face in white fire. In that flash, she didn't look powerful anymore. She looked desperate, cornered by her own obsession. Lydia, I said, my voice soft but sharp, go home before this gets worse. Worse? She smiled, and it wasn't sane. You haven't seen worse yet. Then, almost theatrically, she tossed her flashlight into the mud and turned away. Her car door slammed, tires screeched, and just like that, the enforcer in crimson vanished into the storm. I stood there for a long time, rain soaking through my shirt, staring at the rippling puddles where she'd stood. Something about her words clung to me, the way zealots sound when they know they're losing their faith. Inside, I checked my home cameras. She hadn't touched the door, hadn't broken in this time, but she'd been watching. Maybe to scare me, maybe to remind me she could. Either way, the message was clear. Lydia Hale wasn't done. She'd lost her power in the daylight. Now, she was taking the fight into the dark. And this time, she wasn't protecting rules. She was defending madness. The morning after Lydia Hale's arrest, Cedar Ridge didn't look the same. The streets were still lined with perfect lawns and manicured hedges, but something invisible had shifted, like the air was finally breathing again. Neighbors walked slower. They waved to one another instead of looking over their shoulders. For the first time in months, no one was afraid of a clipboard or a citation left under their windshield. But I couldn't shake the image of her, the board chair, being led out in handcuffs, her crimson jacket soaking in the porch light like spilled wine. For all her arrogance, there had been something hollow in her eyes at the end. Control had been her religion, and she'd just watched her church burn. That night, I stood outside my house again, the same porch where it had started, the same front door she'd once walked through without permission. But now it was quiet. No security cars patrolling, no HOA threats taped to mailboxes, just rainwater trickling down the curb and the faint hum of peace rebuilding itself. Laura joined me, hands tucked into her jacket pockets. It's strange, she said softly. The board's already planning elections. People are actually volunteering. I smiled faintly. Fear was never a long-term government. She glanced sideways. You really think this will stick? People like her? They always find a way to crawl back. I looked out over the neighborhood lights. Maybe, but this time, she taught everyone how to spot tyranny before it wears heels. Laura laughed under her breath. That's poetic, detective. Unintentionally, I said, then paused. But maybe necessary. 2 weeks later, the officer of rules made headlines again. Former HOA president faces 12 charges, the paper read. The town's gossip circle devoured every detail. But the real story wasn't her fall. It was the awakening she'd caused. People started tearing down the outdated bylaws she'd weaponized. They opened the clubhouse doors for movie nights instead of violation hearings. The same residents who once whispered in fear now debated openly about fairness and boundaries. Even the old oak tree in front of my house, her favorite obstruction of community symmetry, was spared from removal. Its roots had cracked the sidewalk, yes, but those cracks had become a symbol now. Imperfect, defiant, alive. One evening, I got a letter from an older neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, the same woman Lydia once fined for having her grandkids. Toys on the lawn. It read, "Thank you for reminding us that rules should protect, not punish." That line stayed with me. Later that night, I walked to the end of the block. The house across from the park, the one that had once been Lydia's fortress, was dark and empty. A "for sale" sign swung gently in the wind. I thought about her final words, how she warned me that order would collapse without her. But she was wrong. Order hadn't collapsed. It had evolved, because the community had learned something she never understood. Real leadership doesn't come from fear. It comes from trust. I looked up at the security camera she'd once used to watch me. It was unplugged now, the lens facing nothing but sky. And for the first time in a long while, Cedar Ridge felt like home again. I turned toward the camera and said quietly, more to myself than anyone else, if you've ever stood up to someone who thought power made them untouchable, remember this. Sometimes justice doesn't knock. It walks straight through the front door. If you believe truth outlives tyranny, hit subscribe and share your story below. Together, we make sure justice doesn't stay silent. Then I smiled, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me.